Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our 12th class. This will be most likely the finale of our the first section, the first chapter of Yoga Sutras, which is the Samadhi Pada. So let us take a moment before we start to center ourselves, gather our thoughts in this moment, awareness. Let us double inhale, tense the body, double exhale, twice more. Last time. Releasing every tension, every anxiety, bringing the mind in this moment, gazing through the spiritual eye, activating our willpower, our willingness, our openness to receiving these techniques, these tools, these deep philosophies. And with an open heart, let us draw the grace of our gurus in this session. Let us pray, Divine Mother, Heavenly Father, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Vahiri Mahashay, Swami Shri Yukteswar Ji, beloved Gurudev, Paramhans Yogananda Ji, saints and sages of all religion, dear friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. O great ones, be with us, inspire us, hold our hands, draw our thoughts, attract our hearts, so that we could open ourselves completely to understand these teachings, to be present to these transcendental truths, and to become one with thee. We are thine, be thou eternally ours. Peace. Keeping our mind focused, let us listen these chants to go deeper into this moment at the core, at the center of our awareness. keeping the vibrations of Om, of the Lord Shiva, of the primordial vibration of Pranava, and attuning to that vibration that is ever present, ever vibrating, scintillating in this moment and all the moments, being one with that vibration, surrendering into that vibration. Shanti. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome once again. So, as we started, this is our 12th class of this series of Demystifying Patanjali. And as we know, this is the first chapter that most likely we are going to conclude today, which is the chapter on Samadhi, right? And this is supposed to be an introduction, right? Introduction to Samadhi. And we know Patanjali, being Patanjali, he is now or has already taken us to the depth of the entire science of yoga in this first chapter itself. And in the last few sutras, we were really going into all the different stages of samadhi, as Patanjali puts it, right? And Patanjali has very clearly delineated the different stages of samadhi, broadly classifying the overall uh, s- uh, different kinds of samadhi into two buckets. One being the nirbij, the sabij samadhi, and the other being the nirbij samadhi, right? And as we were discussing in the other class, the concept of bij here means the concept of support, or the concept of alambana, or the pratyaya, which we use for meditation, right? So in the sub-beej stages of samadhi, there is always a object. There's always a ground which is used to support our consciousness to go deeper into the states of samadhi, because otherwise it is extremely difficult to hold this consciousness, this field of awareness, which is constantly in the state of vrittis, right? So we need a support to begin with, and then gradually this support becomes weaker and weaker, as we discussed in the last class. And then at after a particular stage, we reach a stage where the entire support is no longer required, and the awareness rests in itself, right? And that is the stage, and that is the state of nirbij samadhi, which is a very advanced stage of samadhi. And even that in itself is not enough, or rather, one one single experience of that state of nirbij samadhi is not enough, as we'll discuss today, that it requires us to become familiar with repeated engagement, repeated, or rather repeated submersion in that state of nirbij samadhi, which brings its own wave or its own vrittis, which subdues all the different vrittis, or the vyuthana vrittis of our otherwise outward directed mind, to take us deeper, and then finally in a way burn all seeds of karma, burn all seeds of desires, craving, and clinging, which leads to complete freedom, which leads to complete resting into our own self, which is the state of yoga, or rather the perfection of yoga, which is the state of the complete nirodha of all the vrittis, right? So, as we were looking at, we in the last class we looked at a unique word which Patanjali introduced us to, and the word was samapatti. Right now, this word samapatti, as we discussed in the last class, refers to this ability of our mind, of our awareness, to act like a perfect instrument to reflect reality or to reflect whatever aspect of reality we are trying to sort of bring our focus to our awareness on, right? And it's the common example which is given is of a crystal, right? Just like when a pure unblemished crystal is brought near an object, that crystal reflects the quality of whatever object it is placed near to. If it is a red rose, the crystal is completely filled with that red color, even though in itself it is transparent. In fact, because it is completely transparent, it can un sort of un in a completely pure fashion reflect the true nature of reality. And that is what we are going to also look at, how and what exactly a mind like this reflects, and what is the experience of a experiencer in that state of samapati, right? Now, the difficulty and the simultaneous ease is that these successively deeper states of samadhi are so deep that words will no longer suffice, and hence there's not much to talk about these states of samadhi, because they are so deep. And essentially, we are, as we discussed earlier, even in our discussion on the different stages of samadhi, which came earlier in this section itself, that there is a sampragyata samadhi, and then we enter into the state of asampragyata samadhi. And sampragyata samadhi is where the cognition, the mental sort of functioning is still operating, right? While the state of asampragyata samadhi, or the process of asampragyata samadhi, is where the cognition itself is no longer present, right? So when cognition is also no longer present, it is not possible to describe those deeper experiences of samadhi, and hence it is also very difficult to talk about them. But the good part is, and the good news is, that for the most part we are going to discuss these earlier stages of samadhi, which are building up to that state of asampragyata samadhi, where then it is like we are essentially now merging into that ocean of reality, and we are no longer doing that as a doer, as an agent, and rather it is like the process now keeps on unraveling itself, and hence it becomes like an autonomous process after that state of completion of sampragyata samadhi, right? So now, in last class, we were discussing, as we discussed earlier, that there are two different classifications which Patanjali uses to break down these categories of samadhi. So one he calls sabij samadhi, which is where there is a bij, there is a object of meditation and or object of samadhi, and then there is a nirbij samadhi, where there is no longer any object of samadhi, or these the nirbij samapati, right? Now, if we again go back to the different stages as we were looking earlier, what are these two different or what are the even the sub stages or sub categories of these Sarvija and Nirvija Samadhi? So Sarvija, when we looked at it, essentially what is happening is that, and let me recap the whole process, right? Now, the whole process, as we also have been discussing, that first, when we go into meditation, what happens, there's a lot of restlessness in the mind, in the awareness, because there's a lot of vrittis which are constantly upcoming, which is constantly distracting us, pulling our mind upwards, right? So, first, we use a lot of upayas, right? We use a lot of upayas, or you can say techniques, to first calm these gross vrittis, right? And these upayas are essentially the techniques of dharana, techniques of concentration, which first reduces these gross distractions. And when these gross distractions are reduced, as we discussed in the last class, we reach a state, or we reach a threshold of concentration, which is generally called in especially in Theravada Buddhist terminology, these are called something called access concentration, right? So it is that state where we have reached a threshold where the concentration is just enough that we are the mind is going to be more stable, or gradually become more and more stable, and not get distracted by these gross distractions, right? So this essentially is the first stage where our concentration has become deep enough. So this is that threshold of concentration that we first cross. And when you're meditating, the experience is also very pronounced, right? It's not that you not notice it. That is a way to put it, right? So when we start to meditate, you'll see that there is a constant wrestling of our willpower against these tendency of the mind to get outwards, right? And when we are, say, suppose doing Hong So, you would have seen that mind is constantly trying to grab any particular thought or any idea. It could be a future planning, it could be a past action, it could be any random thing, right? And the whole practice of Hong So is that bringing our mind back from that distraction and then placing it back on breath, right? Now, as this practice becomes strong, what happens, it becomes easier and easier to do this, right? What it means that the pull of these thoughts, of these distractions, become weaker and weaker. And what does that lead to is that it becomes easier and easier to remain focused on the breath or on that mantra, right? Which is happening. Now, it may not happen very soon, and generally it requires two things. It requires, obviously, and we have also discussed this, that it requires first uh, repeated practices, right? And uninterrupted practices. So as we discussed, it requires dirgha kale nairantarya abhyas, right? Nirantar, which means that it has to be uninterrupted, continuous, and dirgha kal means it has to be of long duration. So if you're just sitting for 5 minutes, if you're just sitting for 10 minutes, you may not really see that. In fact, when you are able to sit, especially more than, say, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, you will see suddenly there's a new quality of awareness, which it's like it turns on, right? And what is that new quality? You'll feel that suddenly there's a lucidity of experience, right? There's a lucidity of your awareness, where, because your thoughts have become very weak, or the pull of the thoughts have become so weak, that you can very easily rest in that state of focus, right? And it starts to mature, and then the dharana sort of enters into the state of dhyana, right? Which is like effortless focusing or absorption on the object of meditation, right? So this is the first state of entering into dhyana. And then once you continue deeper, then we start to touch upon the experiences of samapati or samadhi, right? Which is essentially, first, what happens is that whatever object we have chosen, say, suppose it could be that breath, it could be the light we are seeing at the spiritual eye, or it could be the sound of om vibration that we are hearing, right? Whatever that object is, what starts to happen is that first these gross thoughts will become very diminished. And these are not just thoughts, these are all the kinds of hindrances, right? Which we have talked earlier about. Hindrances like dullness, right? Of doubt, of essentially, it could be desires, right? It could be some ill will to for another person, right? So not just gross thoughts, but also these distractions which are pulling us, right? It could be restlessness of the body, it could be restlessness of thoughts, it could be restlessness of emotions. All of that, which is what is really distracting us, first of all, that gets subdued, right? And once that gets subdued and we are concentrated, or getting more and more, increasingly more concentrated on that object, suddenly you'll also feel a very comfortable experience in the body. It's like what Patanjali says, Sthiram Sukham Asanam. So first your body is becoming sthira, which is that your body is becoming stable, firmly rooted, right? But it also gets into the state of sukha, right? Which is that it gets into a state of almost not just ease, but it's like happiness, right? And there's an happiness which is coming because of this ease of body, mind, and emotions, right? Because of the tranquiling of all that, there's a ease in your experience in the meditation, right? So these are the preliminary stages, right? When you go deeper, what happens? Whatever object, again, as we have chosen, first we enter into what is called the vitarka stage, right? Where there is a gross thought which is still operating. But the thing is that gross thought, the pull of that gross thought is not enough, right? So it's like you're able to focus on that object while in the background there is still a gross thought which is there. It's almost like while I'm focusing on my breath, there is, say, suppose a version of me talking about something, right? I'm just giving you a kind of an scenario which may happen, and this voice that you're hearing, while you can still hear it because it's a gross thought, it's a discursive kind of a thought, but you are not distracted by it. That is, while there is a part of your attention which is aware of it, you're not getting pulled into that, and that has happened because you have moved into and beyond the access concentration or the upachara, sort of upachara samadhi, right? Now, because we have entered into that realm, now I can still focus on my object while this discursive thought is operating, right? And that is why these first two stages are called something called savitarka and nirvitarka, right? So first there is this vitarka, and savitarka means with that vitarka, right? And then there is a nirvitarka, which means without that vitarka, or without that discursive or gross thought, right? Essentially, you are going from that uh, gross thought to subtle thought. So what happens once we enter into this nirvitarka stage, then we start to enter into something called savichar samadhi, right? Which is now the gross thought has subsided, but there is still a subtle vichar, right? Now, what is the vichar, or what is rather the experience of that vichar, is that it's almost like there is still a sort of a reference from which you are observing these experiences, or observing this, all of this that we are talking about, that comfort of the body, the tranquilizing of your breath, or the tranquilizing of the emotions. So all of these experiences are being watched, and by experience are experienced by a watcher. And then there is a more subtle form of thought which now starts to operate, right? And that is the state of savichar samadhi, right? Now, when even that gets into complete quietude, right, or complete tranquility, what happens then? From that savichar, we move into the state of nirvichar samadhi, right? Now, which is again my concentration, or our concentration has become so focused, the samapati or the absorption has become so engrossing that even this subtle thought is no longer sort of there, or no longer operating, because I have really pulled the overall the energies even from that aspect of my cognition, right? So we also talked about this. Essentially, throughout this process, what is happening, that in our normal waking consciousness, there are various functions of our cognition which keep on operating, right? There's a function of there are various functions which are related to mind, which are related to conceptualization, with respect to memory, with respect to planning for the future, all that, right? So there's a various sort of like a bundle, or a collection of different mental processes or cognitive processes which keep on operating in our waking consciousness, right? And through this process of dhyana and samadhi, what we are trying to do is to control and switch off all of these different modules of the cognitive processes, right? Because essentially what we are trying to do is pull all of these energies which is getting wasted, or you can say getting used for doing all of these mental processes, and trying to bring that and focus it even further into the mind, to the breath, and to the object of our concentration, which is what is going to help us go deeper into the state of samadhi, right? Because even, I mean, when we come to the path, we talk about this quite often, that all this meditation business is not a process which which we can say is a very sort of relaxed. While it is has to be relaxed, it is not something which can happen without energy, right? So it requires huge amount of energy, but it is not a restless kind of an energy. It is an energy which is concentrated and then which is directed towards one purpose, and that one purpose is to reflect and realize our true state of being, or our true reality, right? And the idea is, as we start to pull in this energy first from our gross sort of body, then from our gross senses, then from our gross thoughts, then from our subtle thoughts, what is happening is that we are bringing all that energy. It's like a charge that we are developing, right? So it's like all of this energy, while it was dissipating, it is never, if it is always dissipating, our mind or our awareness does not have enough charge to really bring that spark of illumination, right? So to bring out that spark of illumination, what we need to do is we need to gather that energy so much so that we can charge it and that ignite that charge into a spark of illumination, right? So that is what we are trying to do throughout this process. So what happens once we have gone deeper into the state of nirvichar samadhi, then it goes into these subtle. So in these stages, it is still sabij samadhi what we are discussing, right? So there's still a bij, but as we had discussed earlier, when we are discussing all the different categories of samadhi, then comes the two further stages of samadhi, which are again part of sampragyata samadhi, which is the first comes the sananda samadhi, which is the absorption, or rather samadhi, on ananda aspect, the bliss aspect of our consciousness, right? And then it deepens further into something which is called, after the ananda aspect, then we move into something called sasmita, right? Which is the I amness, right? So now what is happening, especially in these two states, what you can observe, that there is no thought. And we would and this is not something which is extremely like something which we have never experienced, right? Even in our sort of, even in our day-to-day processes, right, you would have seen that there is a gross reflection, a gross thought process, and then there is almost a latent subconscious, or you can say super conscious processing, which happens in our mental space, right? Which is where you know an answer, but essentially you know this, you don't know what are those steps by which we have arrived at those answers. Why? Because the calculation or the processing is essentially happening subliminally, or happening under our conscious awareness, right? So it is something like that. It is like, what happens now, we are not even aware in terms of, and when we talk about vichar, we also discuss what it essentially means is this conceptualization in terms of words or language, or language based articulation, right? That is what these gross and subtle thoughts are. Subtle is obviously less of that, gross is more of that, right? But when we subside all of it, we get into a realm where there is still an awareness which is very much operating, but that awareness is operating from a latent sort of processing. And then we are no longer, they are no longer gross language based, thought based sort of experience, but it's like an experience of first, of that bliss, right? It is like I am bliss, right? That is what we start to experience in this first stage of sananda samadhi, right? So it's almost as if we start to get absorbed in the entire, the Anandamaya Kosh, right? The bliss body. And then it goes deeper and it goes even further into the state of pure I amness, right? Which is the Sasmita. Asmita as a word means identity, right? Asmita. So there are various words which are used to describe identity or ego, right? So Asmita is also a sort of a, you can say, a side of ego, right? But it is a much purer reflection of that ego into buddhi, right? As we discussed earlier, there are various segments of our awareness or our antakarna. There is chit, manas, buddhi, and ahankar, right? So ahankar is that sort of more tamas aspect of our identity. Asmita is a more sattvic aspect of our identity, right? Because all of these mental processes happen through the play of of three gunas, right? Which we have also discussed earlier, which is the Rajoguna, Tamoguna, and Sattva-guna, right? So with the different proportion or mixture of these different gunas, the quality of our awareness also changes, right? So when we are in the Sasmita Samadhi, there's a huge sort of, you can say, or in fact, almost complete immersion in this Sattva Guna, where the buddhi is completely transparent and lucid, and we are completely in touch with our experience, just as our experience, right? So the experience is almost like in it's like we become one. Our identity becomes one with everything, and everything becomes as part of that identity, right? So we become only the I amness. So in that entire cognition, the only thing which we are experiencing, if we can call that experience, is that experience of identity, of the experience of I amness, the experience of existence, right? So it's obviously there is a illumination aspect, which is the Sat or the Chit aspect, and then there is the Ananda aspect that we first experience in the Sananda Samadhi, and then there is a Sat aspect, which is the existence aspect of our Satchidananda body or the Satchidananda form, which completes its sort of experiencing till we reach the state of Sananda Samadhi, right? And this is where the entire sort of side of experiencing ends, right? Because what happens after the journey after this, and mind you, the journey is still not finished, right? It's pretty much still very much on, right? And what happens, as we also discussed earlier, that many sort of yogis are not able to go past the state of Sasmita and Sananda Samadhi, and they sort of remain there and get stuck there, and then after their life they either become videhas or prakriti layas, right? That they get merged into the prakriti, or they become disembodied sort of identity or soul, you can say, and then they have to take another body because their entire sanchita karma, which is the entire you can say corpus of karma, has yet not been burned. So there is still that karma which again requires that soul or that identity to take a body, and then they again have to take a body. But because they have gathered so much merits out of their karma, the next journey becomes very fast, and from that state of prakriti layers or videhas, they can quickly advance into the state of asampragyata, and finally into the state of complete nirvikalpa and complete freedom, right? Which is the complete samadhi or kaivalya, as it is called by Patanjali, right? So, what happens, why it becomes so alluring, that this is the pinnacle of experience, right? You can say, and that is what is happening, that we have really given up, and that is the development of Vairagya. So, as our concentration is developing, as our focus is developing further, all the different, you can say, all the different attractions, all the different things which were engrossing our experience or our identity, one by one they all fall back, right? First all the gross desires fall, then all the subtle desires fall, then all the gross thoughts fall, or then all the subtle thoughts are falling, and finally the even that first we transcend rather the ananda aspect, right? So we move even beyond that. Imagine the greatest bliss that you can feel, which is the bliss of our own bliss body, right? We move and transcend even beyond that, and what is beyond that is our identity, the I amness, the existence, the eternal existence. We And that is the pinnacle of experience, right? So there can be no experience, and by experience I mean an experience which you can describe or which you can articulate, right? Because even beyond there are experiences, but because that becomes asampragyata, which means there is no longer a cognitive recollection of those experiences. It's as if even if those experiences are there, we are no longer able to recollect or sort of share that experience. So imagine, this is the pinnacle of experience that a human body can give you, right? And that pinnacle of experience is so engrossing, right? That a lot of yogis get stuck at that stage and then they leave their body, right? And that is what we need to be aware of while we are, and that is why Patanjali has so clearly articulated or described the entire journey, is so that we are aware of these pitfalls and so that we are no longer stuck at that point, right? And then we go beyond. And what is beyond? What is beyond is the state of nirbij samadhi, right? So now I know there's a lot of recap, and maybe that is helpful, and maybe since a lot of new people might be here, they might not be aware of all that that we have discussed. So obviously, it will be helpful to go back to the previous discussions and sort of get a better understanding of all that. But now we'll go into the final verses of the first chapter, which is essentially going to talk about all the different further stages of the Nirbija Samadhi. But obviously, it will keep on referring to Sabij and Nirbija Samadhi, right? Because essentially there's not much to talk about when it comes to Nirbija Samadhi, apart from the fact that this is going to take us to the ultimate freedom. But let us now go to the further verses. So we are now coming to the 46th verse, right? And this now we're going to move from 46 to the 51st rather sutra, which is the final sutra of this chapter. So the 46th sutra, Patanjali says, Ta eva sa bija samadhi, right? So this is just all that we discussed, where Patanjali is saying ta eva, which means all those are sa bija samadhi, right? Which is all those we discussed, savitark, nirvitark, savichar, nirvichar, sanand, and sasmita. All those are sa bija samadhi, which is they have a bij, which means they have a object of meditation. They are something where mind is focused on, right? And there is a reflection of that experience, right? That is why it's called Sabija Samadhi. Then so next, let us move to the 47th verse, which is where Patanjali says, Nirvichara Vaisharadhya Adhyatma Prasadam. Right now, let me break down this whole sutra. Right now, those who are not familiar with these structure of sutras, now these sutras don't really follow rules of grammar, right? So they're almost like they're just bullet points, right? So they're not complete sentences or elaborations, and that is why they are more like very high level pointers, and that is where we need commentators, we need realized masters to give us a reflection of what really Patanjali meant here, right? So let us look at the different words which Patanjali is using here. He says nirvichara, which is what we are going to talk, what we talked about. So as we discussed earlier, there is first the savitark nirvitark, and then there is savichar, and then there is a nirvichar, right? Now nirvichar means and again nirvichar is used in two contexts, right? One, there is a stage of nirvichar samadhi, and second, even the state after nirvichar samadhi in the sequence, which is the sanand and sasmita, all become collectively also are known as the nirvichar samadhi, right? Because all of them there is no subtle thought which is operating, right? Because we have already moved beyond subtle thought, we have already moved beyond vichar, right? As an instrument of reflection, right? So what Patanjali is saying is nirvichar. So he's talking about what is happening or what happens in by the virtue of being in this state of nirvichar samadhi. He says Vaisharadhya. Now Vaisharadhya, there are different interpretations of this word, right? It can mean uninterrupted flow into that state of nirvichar samadhi, which it can also mean being perfect or gaining mastery, right? And both of them are in their intent, both of them mean the same thing, which is that as we become or as we spend more and more time and we sort of soak more and more into this experience of nirvichar samadhi, what happens is that we get this proficiency because of this undisturbed flow of being, or being in this undisturbed flow of samadhi, that it brings adhyatma prasad, right? Adhyatma prasad, again, very simply put, what Patanjali is saying is that it brings on all the purity, the benediction, the illumination of adhyatma, right? Of spiritual knowledge, right? Adhyatma, I mean, there are different ways you can interpret adhyatma again, but adhyatma generally would mean something related to spiritual knowledge, right? It may also, or it can also refer to the qualities of Atman, Adhyatman, right? That is what, when you break this word, it comes from Adhya, Adi and Atman, right? So essentially, it is that which is relating to the Atman, which is our individual soul, as we discussed, that our identity, when the Satchidanand, when it is in this individualized consciousness, that is Atman, and then there is an unindividualized consciousness, which is Brahman, right? And as has been described in our Vedanta through all the Mahavakyas, that there is an equivalence between this Atman and the Brahman, right? Tattvamasi, right? Or Atha, I mean, I mean, there are various other Mahavakyas, but essentially all of them meaning that this Atman and Brahman are the same thing, right? Or Pragyanam Brahman, right? So there are different ones, right? So what Patanjali is saying is that by the practice or by that experience of repeated exposure or being in that state of Nirvichara Samadhi, it brings that spiritual illumination or that spiritual sort of purity in our experience. But what it means, it gets reflected in further sutras. So then Patanjali in the next sutra, which is the 48th sutra, Patanjali says, Ritambara Tatra Pragya, right? Now this is what really are we getting as part of that Adhyatma package, right? So now this is a very you can say a very beautiful sutra, right? Because this word, right, Ritambara, right, it's extremely elegant and extremely you can say it's almost a word of highest qualification, right? Of highest spiritual qualification, right? Now Rita, Rita is a very important word coming directly from Vedas, right? Now Rita actually comes, or the meaning of Rita is essentially the highest spiritual truth, right? Now, what is that highest spiritual truth? As per Vedas, all the nature, the Prakriti, the functioning of Prakriti, the patterns in the nature, right? That is the highest intelligence, right? Which is manifested, which is present in the manifest universe. So, Rit comes from that that perspective or that side, which means that Patanjali is talking about something which is not of relative knowledge, right? It is a spiritual knowledge. It is an absolute knowledge. It is a knowledge of highest order, right? So if you can divide knowledge into different spheres or different orders, it is an order of highest magnitude. Why? Because it is talking about the inherent laws, talking about the inherent patterns, talking about the inherent intelligence in the prakriti itself, right? Now the word rhythm in English also comes from that rith, right? So essentially it is talking about the rhythms in the nature, the rhythms and the patterns and the intelligence which is inherited in the universe. We are getting a glimpse of that knowledge, right? Now, word Ritambara means that which bears that truth, right? Bhara means that which is holding or bearing, and Rit means that knowledge, right? So, word Ritambara means that which is a bearer of that highest order of intelligence, Tat Pragnya. Right, pragnya again, as we have discussed multiple times, means our wisdom or our sort of wisdom consciousness, right? It is that knowledge which is, or that part of our consciousness which is able to reflect knowledge, right? Which it is not that mind aspect, it is the buddhi aspect of our antakarana, which is what is reflecting any higher order wisdom, right? So what Patanjali is saying is that by that practice, by that exposure, by that soaking, by that immersion, by that submersion in this state of nirvichar samadhi, we get the truths of highest order, the Ritambara Pragnya, right? The wisdom which bears the highest truth. Now, this is where language fails, right? Now, a easy way to maybe describe that, it's like there is and this is a common example, right? There is a word sugar, right? Now, word sugar reflects to an object sugar, right? A reality sugar, a experience of sugariness, right? But word sugar is not equivalent to that experience of sugar, right? So when you really taste sugar in your mouth, the experience which we get out of that tasting, that is very different from somebody telling you the word sugar. Or if I just in my mind think about the word sugar, and if I taste a sugar in my mouth, they are categorically different in terms of knowledge, right? Similarly, a knowledge which we are getting through the means of words and inference and discussions versus an experience that we get directly by observing something, there is an order of magnitude of difference in these two different ways of getting knowledge, right? In fact, that is what Patanjali going to talk about in the next sutra, and that is what Patanjali is talking about here. So and while this is not the right example for the kind of truth now Patanjali is talking about, so it's not even the truth of an experience, right? It is the truth of reality itself, that how reality operates. Now there's a story where there was in one of the Christmas meditations, when Master was having this deep experience with Divine Mother. So it's almost like he was in Samadhi for straight, I think, 1 or 2 days, right? I mean, and this was a different, maybe there are multiple versions of this experience, but there were times when he was, and this is all around the same time, and he was in extremely deep states of samadhi for very long time. And after sort of coming out of the samadhi, or while he was sort of just sort of reflecting back on that experience, he was talking out aloud in that meditation in front of all of his devotees, where he says, oh, how now I understand, Divine Mother, how you really do it, right? So it is that kind of realization where you are experiencing almost reality, sort of getting uh, fabricated, right? If you can call that. It's like in the quantum foam, the quantum flux, how reality, the particles in the fields, the quarks, the bosons, all that are created. It's almost like witnessing that, right? Versus obviously knowing a theory about that, right? Which what I'm telling you, right? So that is the order of difference in the experience of that truth versus knowing or maybe just hearing about that truth, right? And that is what Patanjali says in the next verse, where Patanjali says, Shruta Anumana Pragya Bhyam Anya Vishaya Vishesha Arthvat, right? So what Patanjali is saying is that all this experience, this Ritambara Pragya experience, right? It is unlike any other Visheshva Arthvat, means unlike any other experience which we get through our senses or through the process of Shruta, which means hearing, which means it could be hearing or it could be reading from a book, etc., right? All of them come in the category of knowledge from Shruti, right? From Shruta. So Shruti or Anuman, Anuman means inference, right? So they're generally the whole process of knowledge, and we have also discussed this earlier, can be categorized into different ways, but these are two broad categories. One, either you listen it from somebody. Now it could be your teacher, it could be your companion, it could be your guru bhai, or it could be a book, right? For that matter, or a scripture. All of that is one side of gaining knowledge. Then there is a kind of gaining knowledge through the process of inference, where we just through the process of intellectual deduction we reach to a conclusion, right? Saying, okay, if this is true, then this is true, and hence this might be true, right? It is something like which Swamiji talks about, right? When he got that experience, the first experience of what God must be, right? And he sort of with that deduction he comes to the conclusion that God must be that consciousness, right? Because without that consciousness nothing can be experienced, and so on and so forth, right? So that is a process of inference, right? But this experience of Ritambara Pragya is unlike all that experience or all that process of gathering knowledge via either hearing, reading, listening, or inferring, right? Either ways, right? That is what Patanjali is saying. Now, moving on, the fifth verse. Now, this is the second last verse of this chapter. Patanjali says, Tajjah samskara anya samskara paribandhi, right? Now again, the last two verses are essentially now just going to talk about, or just trying to trying to talk about what lies ahead, or what is first of all, what does it experience of all of these experiences of samadhi do, and what lies ahead, right? So first Patanjali says tajjah means from that, arising from that, or happening because of that. Tajjah samskara. Samskara means the, so again, samskara is a very technical word, right? But you can imagine, by repeated practice of something, we sort of bring in a certain quality, or we develop or mature a certain quality of our awareness, right? So that is what Patanjali is saying. By repeated practice, or repeated getting into that state of nirvichar samadhi, what happens? That anya samskara paribandhi. Paribandhi means get obstructed, or get sort of controlled, or get nirodha, right? That is what we are going to go next. But right now he's saying, by that nirvichara experiences, all the other samskaras. Now, what are the other samskaras? All the samskaras which are coming from our karma, right? Which is coming from our prarabdha, which is coming from all my desires, my proclivities, my conditioning. So they have a certain samskaras, right? They have a certain pattern of operating, which is like, I always like to do this. I always like to talk about this. I am more interested in this versus this, right? So all of that bias, all of that conditioning have a particular samskaras, right? So what this nirvichara samadhi does, it sort of, it controls, it obstructs, it opposes, it inhibits this flow, this natural flow of the natural samskaras which we have gathered through our prarabdha karma, right? And then in the final verse, Patanjali says, Tasyapi nirodha, sarva nirodha, nirbija samadhi. Right? Now, this is only what Patanjali can say about nirbija samadhi. Right? That is the sort of one way to think about is, that is so subtle it is, right? So unqualifiable it is, that you can't really sort of say that, okay, this is like this, and this, because there's nothing you can talk about, right? It's like everything that you could talk about is now part of that experience. It is part of that oneness of experience, that nothing can lie beyond. And every experience, when we talk about experience, needs to have this sort of fragmentation of reality, right? Because if I have to talk about light, I need to know darkness, and I have to contrast light with darkness, right? If I have to talk about sugar, or if I have to talk about sweetness, I can only talk about that in contrast to something like which is bitter or sour or any other taste, right? And that is where all of that way of knowledging, or way of getting knowledge, is sort of discriminating or cutting, right? It's breaking reality. It's like conceptually, because you can't really break reality, right? The only thing we can do is, we can break our mind, right? We break our mind, we break our consciousness, and then we sort of create these partitions, conceptual partitions in our cognition. But when we move beyond these, when we move beyond even the ability to do that, we get into a realm where we are with that reality 100%. And because we are with that 100% reality, there's nothing which can really talk about that, right? Or no way we can talk about that, because even the language, experiences, everything is part of that, right? And that is what is happening. Now what Patanjali is saying is that tasapi, because of that, or out of that, right? Out of what? Tasyapi nirodha, right? By the nirodha of it, which means that when we move beyond the even the nirvichar samadhi, right? Or in fact, in all the three nirvana, and here Patanjali means all three, right? The nirvichar, the sanand, the sasmita. When we move beyond all three, right? Now the object, there is no object of awareness. There is no support. There is no alambana. There is no pratyaya to the ground of consciousness, right? Everything becomes that consciousness itself. In that state, it nirods, it obstructs, it controls, it inhibits even that samskara. What samskara? The samskara of the control, right? And this is how recursive this is, right? So first we have a vyuthana samskara, which is a normal day-to-day samskaras, right? Then there is this nirvichar samskara, which are obstructing this sort of outgoing or outward bound samskaras. And then there is another samskara which nirods both of them, right? Which is tranquilizing, subsiding, completely sort of stoppage of all of that samskara leads into the state of nirbija samadhi, right? And when we enter into the nirbija samadhi, then essentially we are going towards the asampragyata samadhi. Now, the journey does not end here also. We have to perfect this. Then comes the dharma mega samadhi, then comes the viveka khyati samadhi, and then comes the final kaivalya, right? So it's a long, long path. And that is why it is useful to understand that it is not a short path. It is not a easy path, and this is not to discourage, right? It is to know that what it requires to really go to the end of this journey, right? And we may decide not to go at the end, right? We may decide that maybe I'm happy with that access concentration because I'm in that state. I'm no longer sort of bogged down by my emotions or bogged down by my thoughts, or I'm happy with that state, first state of Savitarka Samadhi, right? That I'm no longer sort of extremely or no longer getting distracted or pulled by those discursive thoughts. Or I am happy with that experience of Savichar Samadhi, where even while there are some subtle thoughts, I'm not getting distracted, I'm perfectly fine with it, I'm okay, right? And but that does not end the journey, right? And that is what at least we should know and make a conscious choice about, right? Which means that even if I'm doing all that, right, I'm still in the cycle of birth and death. I'm still in the cycle of getting the allotment, the next allotment of karma, which is waiting in the sanchita side, right? So the way karma happens is that we get a portion of that karma for this lifetime, which is called prarabdha, and rest is there in the huge bank, the heap, as it's called, of karma, which is the sanchita karma. So there's a huge bank which is already there, and that bank of karma will force us to take another body. Now we don't know the kind of karmas there are there on the bank. They have absolutely or may not have any correlation with this life. So it does not mean that because this life is good, the next coming life will also be good, right? Because it all depends on not just our life, but the entire cyclicity of the universe, right? The yugas and multiple things, right? So we don't know the kind of challenges we are going to have, but the good part is because we have progressed to some extent, because we have gathered those positive samskaras also of the practicing of meditation, of deeper states of maybe dhyana, of maybe even deeper states of samadhi, they also have their samskaras, and that samskaras are also carried forward, and that makes us easier, or that makes it easier for us. In fact, all of us being on the path, practicing a path, practice coming on this path of kriya means that we have a strong samskaras of that coming from last or previous lives, right? But the outward circumstances may or may not be very favorable to even practice that, right? But if the circumstances are favorable, we have those samskaras. The our best shot is to complete this journey while we have this body, and while it is extremely long, difficult, and all that, right? But because of all the masters behind us, right, who have done it, who are showing us a path to do it, it makes all the more reason for us to go deeper and to put ourselves completely right, which does not mean to sort of say leave our jobs or leave our relationships or all that, right? It just means a inner commitment to this path, to the practice, to the end goal, whatever life is throwing at us, right? And that is what is really going to take us into the deeper ends of this path and the overall experience of freedom, right? I think we've already crossed the time. I know there's so much we can always talk about, but let us conclude here, right? Or rather, let us stop here, and then we'll come back and then probably pick the thread from where we left, and then we move into the next chapter, which is going to be the sadhana path, right? Which is going to talk about the different practices. So till now, Patanjali is talking about giving us a framework, right, of what we are really after, and now we are going to get a framework of practice, right? And here we'll talk about Ashtanga yoga and all that, right, which we already are familiar to some extent, right? But obviously the depth in which we are going here is completely different. So it'll certainly add a lot of value if you go in this chapter, as and when we go in this chapter. Okay, so let us take a moment. Let us uh, just relax. Let's just be here all that we heard, all that we got, let's just let it be as we allow it to wash over our being, as we allow all of this deep, deep wisdom coming from our lineage, coming from these great masters to permeate our awareness, to permeate our buddhi, so that we are able to just understand the value, the importance, the depth of these teachings. And so that it renews our interest in doing what we are doing with even more zeal, with even more commitment. Om Shanti. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And let's join again whenever we restart. Thank you.